Fox News is going to get outraged here because students at Harvard know history. So let's listen, then I'll explain some inconvenient facts.
All right, who's a greater threat to America and to peace, I should say? America or ISIS? Yesterday, this video got a lot of you fired up.
To world peace? Well, America.
American imperialism and our protection of oil interests in the Middle East are destabilizing the region and allowing groups like ISIS to gain power. As
a Western civilization, we're to blame for a lot of the problems that we're facing now. I don't think anyone would argue that we didn't create the problem of ISIS ourselves.
Right. This morning, the man behind it joins us right now, Caleb Bonham. He's the editor-in-chief of Campus Reform. Caleb, first off, people are stunned because this is maybe one of the top 3 schools in the country, possibly most famous in the world, and you found this school of thought. How many people would you say you edited out to get to those like-minded people who blamed us, not ISIS?
Well, the initial questions that I asked, 2 or 3 people said that ISIS was a greater threat to world peace. But then I was shocked to see that student after student, as we continued our interviews, found ways to blame America. And what I've seen at the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform is that this is sort of a fad that's sweeping the nation, and it's been doing so for several years, where students think it's highbrow to be able to somehow blame America for the world's ills.
So what was the point of going there to bring this up? Just to prove what your theory was?
Well, you know, the idea was to ask what people really thought of this. And I know that among these institutions of higher learning, students are being taught in class that America is to blame. They're hearing our president on many cases talk about how America is to blame. They're hearing situation after situation where America is the root of all evil. And I wanted to hear, I really expected every student to look at me, roll their eyes and say, come on, ISIS is the problem here. But what I find funny about our video is that, and it's sad, my video proves that students are listening to what they're learning in class.
You couldn't come up with a better line if you scripted it. What I'm doing proves that the kids actually are listening to what's happening in class. Oh, how horrible a thing that is. See, what I love about this clip is that it shows Fox News doesn't even bother to try to make an empirical case. Because what they're asking is an empirical question. Who's been a bigger threat to world peace? ISIS, America, or you can throw in anybody into that conversation, okay? And the reality is, how would you go about proving one way or another? I don't know, maybe body count? Casualties? Number of people killed? Number of regions destabilized? Number of governments overthrown? Should I go on? These are all the commonly understood areas where you would go to if you want to try to determine who's worse, a given country or a different group or whatever. So let's dive into it. Here are just some of the countries we've invaded or militarily intervened in since World War II. Guatemala, Indonesia, Cuba, the Congo, Dominican Republic, Peru, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, Lebanon, Grenada, Libya, the Philippines, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Iran, Panama, Iraq, Kuwait, Somalia, Bosnia, Sudan, Afghanistan, Yugoslavia, Serbia, Chile, Syria. Okay, that's just part of the list. I could go on forever. Now, let me stop here because some people would fire back and say, yeah, some of those were humanitarian. Look, I'll grant that to you, that some things that the U.S. has done militarily, you can make a good case that, hey, that actually was for the better. It was a humanitarian intervention. But the reality is that most of those cases had nothing to do with a humanitarian mission. That was the cover story, and we really cared about natural resources in a given area or having vital control of an important geopolitical region. So Bosnia, Kosovo, yeah, maybe you can make a case that made sense. Even recently with Iraq, when we saved the Yazidis on the mountaintop when ISIS was going after them, you could argue that was perfectly humanitarian and it was a good idea. But just because a handful of the interventions might have been good doesn't mean that all of them were, because there are so many and we know the history of them, and most of them were not. So here are just some of the dictators that we supported or installed. Diaz, Gomez, Cabrera, Batista, Duvalier, Pinochet, Marcos, Suharto, Museveni, Zenawi, Mobutu. And again, the list goes on and on. Did you know in Vietnam alone, there were 800,000 to 3 million civilian deaths? In Iraq alone, it was a minimum of 200,000 civilian deaths. So on those two wars alone, we kicked the ass of a ragtag group like ISIS. Are you kidding me? And then also they mock the idea that the U.S. created ISIS, but we did create ISIS. It wasn't on purpose, but we did. So for example, when we went into Iraq and we de-Baathified the government, well, those Sunnis got very angry, and then a lot of them later on teamed up with ISIS because they were so shunted out of the political system in the process, and when the Shiites took over, that you further radicalized the region. Look, everybody knows that if the Sunni Baathists had stayed in power in Iraq and Saddam Hussein stayed in power in Iraq, ISIS never would have rose to power, ever, 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 because there was more Sunni representation in the government. So, I mean, you don't understand history if you come out and say, how can you blame the U.S. for ISIS? For fuck's sake, ISIS's weapons are from us! Because some of them, we approved weapons to go from our allies, Saudi Arabia, to the Free Syrian Army in Syria. ISIS ended up getting those weapons. Okay, also the weapons we left behind in Iraq when we went there in the first place, those are the weapons that ISIS picked up and started using. They wouldn't have had weapons if it wasn't for us. So, I mean, again, Fox News totally clueless in terms of world affairs. And then, finally, what does the world think about this question? Because, again, they make it seem like it's a nonchalant, casual answer, like, obviously America is so great in every way. Well, the World Independent Network and Gallup International did a poll of 66,000 people all around the world, and they asked, who is the biggest threat to world peace? Very simple question. Who's the biggest threat to world peace? You ready for this? Russia, 2%. Syria, 3%. North Korea, Afghanistan, Iran, Israel, all tied, 5%. Pakistan, 8%. China, 6%. The U.S., 24%. We blew everybody out of the water. Now, that's not because people around the world wake up with this irrational hatred of the United States of America because of Kim Kardashian's booty and Justin Timberlake videos. No, it's because we have breeded that hatred. Now, that's not to say that all criticism of the U.S. or all groups that oppose the U.S. are good groups. Absolutely not. But that is to say that a lot of the reason why these countries feel this way is because we bred that feeling with our foreign policy. I mean, we have 900 military bases around the world. 57% of discretionary spending is defense spending. I mean, there's a problem with that. There's a problem with that. You breed hatred when you act in such an irrational, over-the-top, imperialistic kind of way.